Hey everyone. So I talked on Tuesday a little bit about how important it is for us to have conversations with those with whom we disagree. But the question becomes, how do we have good conversations without it devolving into an argument? And I'm sure you've seen this happen in different ways, in different places. Particularly it seems to happen online in the comments box in various places where it suddenly devolves into an argument where it's almost as though the people are talking past each other and they're just basically yelling at each other and saying, well, I'm right and you're wrong, and I can't believe that you would possibly understand this or that you would believe this. I don't understand how anybody would understand or believe it in this way, and how stupid are you, right? They might even go that far. So how do we have a good conversation? Well, one of the first things is to listen in order to understand, not to respond. See, it's so easy for us when we're having a conversation with someone to start storing up and to start planning things in our heads, things that we want to say in response to what they have just shared. The problem is when we're doing that, we're not actually listening to what is being shared. Because as you know, as you're having a discussion, thoughts are kind of jumbled up in your brain in some ways. And at least for me, as I am talking, I'm starting to articulate things better for somebody else. And so if they start to respond to something that I had said earlier without listening to the way that it was clarified in my thoughts, well, then they're not actually listening. So the first thing to do then is to listen in order to understand. And this means that you should assume that the other person is rational, they have thought through their position, and they have good reasons to be in the position they're at. And I think most of us, when we run into problems, don't make that assumption first, and that's why we run into problems. We assume that they haven't thought it through or whatever. So first thing you do is listen to understand, assuming that they have good reasons for their position. Now, the second thing that you should be able to do in order to have a good discussion is to be able to articulate or to spell out their position at least as good as, if not better than themselves. This might be called making a steel man argument rather than a straw man, right? So in logic and in philosophy, they say making a straw man argument is you create the weakest possible representation of an opponent's position and then you attack that. Well, that's easy to do. But if you make a steel man, which means if you make the strongest possible case for another person's position, and then you're still able to see how it doesn't work out, well, then you're showing the best case scenario for their situation, which is what we do for our own all the time, right? Whenever we have an opinion, we make the best case scenario to be the one that we're presenting, not the worst case, which is natural. So the second thing that's important to do is to be able to articulate or spell out their position at least as good as they do. And not only have it in your head, but actually speak it out, because then you become, you find something to agree on right there with that person. Even though you might not agree with what they're saying, you can say, so what I hear you saying is this, blah, 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 blah. And then the person can say, yeah, that's exactly what I mean. So you've agreed on an articulation of their position or how they see the world. Then the next thing to do is not to say, well, that's just dumb, all right? That doesn't help. The next thing to do is to ask questions, to say, okay, well, if that's the case, then how do you respond to this? And you bring up another piece of information or another bit of evidence that might cast a different light on their position. And it's important to keep an open mind yourself and to remember that one conversation rarely changes anyone's mind. So in this conversation, you're not trying to change each other's mind. You're both trying to enlighten the other. You're both trying to find ways in which your position can be made better. You're trying to figure out and get to the root and the truth of what's actually happening and trying to see and bounce ideas off of one another. You might be able to, in a good discussion, at least both of you go away with something to think about. And that by itself is so helpful. As the proverb says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And we all need to find people that are a little bit different than us so that we can sharpen our own understandings and get more awareness and more gracious with one another. So in your conversations this week, find someone that you disagree with and then try some of these techniques out so that you can both grow together.